In January of 2012, a man sat down for a video interview and made a claim so strange it would go on to seed one of the internet's longest-running conspiracy communities. His name, he said, was Bill Wood. He described himself as a former Navy SEAL, active between 1992 and 2000, who had served on a secretive team with abilities that went beyond ordinary military training. According to Wood, he had been part of black operations involving something called Project Looking Glass, a device he claimed had been reverse-engineered from alien technology, capable of letting a trained operator travel through time and space, using nothing but their own mind, or observe every possible future outcome a single choice could produce. The interview was conducted by Carrie Cassidy, and it was published through the platform she co-founded, Project Camelot. To understand why this particular claim still circulates today, more than a decade later, feeding directly into some of the biggest conspiracy movements on the internet, you have to understand both the man and the platform that gave him a stage. Project Camelot was built specifically around this kind of testimony. Founded as an interview series dedicated to whistleblowers, insiders, and self-described witnesses to classified government activity, it built its entire model around a simple premise. Put a camera in front of someone claiming extraordinary insider knowledge, let them talk at length, and let the audience decide what to believe. That model has produced an enormous archive of claims over the years, ranging from UFO disclosure to secret space programs, to exactly the kind of Black Ops time-viewing testimony Bill Wood delivered in that January 2012 interview. Project Camelot doesn't typically present itself as a fact-checking operation or a journalistic outlet verifying these claims against documentary evidence. It presents itself as a platform for testimony, which means the credibility of everything on it rests almost entirely on the credibility of the person being interviewed. That's exactly where Bill Wood's story runs into serious, documented trouble, and it's the part of this story that rarely makes it into the conspiracy retellings. Bill Wood's actual legal name is Bill Brockbroder, and according to public records from the Idaho State Attorney's Office, that's a name with a criminal history attached to it that has nothing to do with black ops or classified time machines. Brockbroder was convicted of sexual offenses against a minor in 1998. He was arrested again in 2012, the same year as his Project Camelot interview, for failing to register as a sex offender in Idaho. Neither of those facts appears in the mythology that grew up around Bill Wood, Navy SEAL psychic operative. They come from actual court and law enforcement records, and they matter here for a specific reason. When someone's entire claim to authority rests on unverifiable personal testimony about secret military service, a documented history of using a different name, and a documented criminal record involving deception are directly relevant to how much weight that testimony deserves. Set that aside for a moment and look at the substance of what Wood actually claimed, because it didn't emerge in a vacuum. By 2012, the Looking Glass mythology already had a foundation laid by other figures. Researcher Bill Hamilton had been circulating material describing a device by that name years earlier, sourced through a contact he identified as Marcia McDowell, describing technology that could allegedly access multiple potential realities. A man using the name Dan Burish had separately claimed, starting in the early 2000s, to have operated similar technology at the classified S4 facility near Area 51, describing plasma chamber devices reverse-engineered from ancient Sumerian artifacts, all timelines converging toward a single date in December of 2012. Wood's interview arrived directly on top of that groundwork, adding his own Navy SEAL framing and his own specific detail, what he called Black Ops trauma-based training, layered onto the same Looking Glass concept that had already been building an audience for the better part of a decade. None of these accounts, taken individually or together, come with anything resembling hard evidence. There's no declassified technical manual for Looking Glass, no procurement record showing it was ever built, no named laboratory report describing how it functioned. What exists is testimony, video interviews, and secondary retellings passed between researchers who often cite each other rather than any documentary source. It's worth noting that real, formerly classified American programs involving psychic phenomena did actually exist. Programs with names like Skinate, Grillflame, and eventually Stargate genuinely were funded by the U.S. government to investigate remote viewing as a potential intelligence tool, and that history is publicly documented. But a 1995 government-commissioned review of that program concluded remote viewing had not been shown to provide any operationally useful intelligence, and the program was shut down. That real history is sometimes cited by looking-glass believers as evidence the government really was pursuing exactly this kind of technology, but the actual documented outcome undercuts the claim rather than supporting it, since the reviewed program was formally terminated after failing to demonstrate reliable results. What makes Bill Wood's specific contribution to this mythology worth revisiting today isn't really the looking-glass claim itself. It's where that claim eventually traveled. Journalists tracking the roots of the QAnon movement have pointed directly back to Wood's 2012 interview as an early influence on that later, far larger conspiracy phenomenon. One of the earliest and most repeated phrases associated with the anonymous Q figure, "future proves past," echoes almost directly the core premise Wood laid out on camera years earlier. The idea that events yet to happen could somehow already be known, verified, or observed in advance, and that the people in on this secret knowledge held power specifically because of that foreknowledge. Wood didn't invent every idea that fed into QAnon, and Project Camelot wasn't the only source feeding that larger movement. But the through line is documented and traceable, a case study in how a single unverified testimony video, given a platform built specifically to amplify testimony over verification, can end up embedded years later inside a conspiracy ecosystem reaching millions of people who've likely never heard Bill Wood's name at all. So what should you actually take away from the Bill Wood story? Not that Project Looking Glass is real. There's no credible evidence supporting that. And the physics underlying the claim doesn't hold together any better here than it does in any of its other retellings. What's genuinely useful about this particular case is what it reveals about how conspiracy testimony accumulates authority over time. Wood's claims weren't independently verified before they spread. They were amplified because they fit neatly into an existing narrative structure that Hamilton and Burrish had already built, delivered by a man whose actual documented history, once you look past the Navy SEAL framing, tells a very different story about his relationship with the truth. Platforms like Project Camelot don't manufacture that gap between testimony and verification. They simply remove the filter that would normally catch it, handing the microphone to whoever is willing to speak with confidence, and letting confidence do the work that evidence usually has to do everywhere else.